Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to another in the series of events for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month 2025. I am Lieutenant Colonel Retired Godfrey Sterling, the Director of the Cyber Incident Response Team Division in the Office of the Prime Minister. And today I have the honor and privilege of hosting this event, as well as moderating an event where my dear friend and colleague will speak. Cybersecurity awareness is something that is critical as we, the practitioners within the ecosystem, seek to impact the constituents far and wide at the mindset level, where we're hoping to change their attitude towards their own personal security and to bring a level of cyber hygienic practices within cyberspace for our nations and our institutions to the point where we can be reassured that the actions of the individuals within our constituencies will not unintentionally cause challenges. This year is especially significant for the Jamaica CIRT as the division celebrates 10 years as a division driving change and building resilience within Jamaica's cyber ecosystem. It has been a long and challenging road, and I have been there for a part of it, but I am grateful to those who went before me. And, the success and failures of the team are such that it has allowed us to grow in strength and in persistence and perseverance as we recognize the challenges that a digitally enabled society and an ever more connected world bring to all our constituents. The reason we're here today is one which is near and dear to my heart, and I hope by the end of the session, you will have a newfound perspective on how we can actually work together to bring about the change we wish to see. Time is short, and so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, the esteemed Sumitra McKinney, a national leader in cybersecurity and digital resilience. She currently serves as the director of the Bahamas' National Computer Incident Response Team, CIRT-BS. And note the BS at the end of it is no BS, right? In this role, she leads efforts to strengthen national cybersecurity capacity, build resilience across critical sectors, and coordinate the implementation of Bahamas' national cybersecurity strategy. Over the course of her career, Sumitra has broken new ground as one of the first women to hold top cybersecurity leadership roles in the Bahamas. These include serving as the inaugural Chief Information Security Officer at the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Today, she continues to champion those cyber resilience efforts through technical capacity building, national awareness campaigns, and policy development. Her passion extends beyond strategy and systems. She's deeply committed to advancing gender representation in cybersecurity, mentoring women entering the field, and leading child online protection initiatives across schools and communities. Sumitra's leadership has been globally recognized. She has received the ISA International President's Award for Cybersecurity in Public Service in 2023 and the ISC Squared Global Achievement Award for Professional Leadership in the Americas in 2024. She's invited frequently to speak at regional and international fora, where she shares her expertise on building cyber resilience, shaping inclusive, people-centered approaches to digital security. And within our little neck of the woods, Sumitra stands tall as one of those pioneering voices who believe that Caribbean, particularly English-speaking Caribbean unity, is critical to the survival of our digital ecosystem. Help me make her welcome as we listen to the message she brings today, and we continue to cheer her on Welcome, Samitra.
Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess it's morning, afternoon for me, and good morning for everyone else. I first have to say, Director Sterling, that this was an introduction I could not have expected. So I was listening and trying to figure out first, you used my line on CIRT-BS. That's the one joke I have. And also, I was trying to remember if that was the introduction or the bio we provided for you. So I want to first start off by saying you've given me such a stellar introduction, but I want to piggyback on one point you made about working together in order to build regional and shared cyber resilience. I want to start by thanking you and your organization, JA CERT, for inviting me here to speak. And I also want to congratulate you on 10 years of having the CERT, JA CERT, and wish you and your team every success for this Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Uh, I have a really short agenda, though I have a very big topic that you've provided today. Today, we're going to speak a little bit, and hopefully we can engage some on cybersecurity for growth, safety, and trust. So let me share my screen here with you, and let's see if I can do this right the first time. Okay. Are you all seeing my screen? Hold on. I think I did not do that right the first time. Oh, I see. Yes, you are seeing my screen. Okay, one quick second. One minute. There's always a technical issue at play, but we will not be detoured. Here we go. Now we're ready. Good job. I mentioned already that we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity from the perspective of building growth, safety, and trust. And when asked to talk to you fine people, this was centered around the perspective of small and medium-sized companies, so micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise. I think we also included financial institutions. But what I'm going to speak to you about today will include all of us and all organizations. It applies to small and medium-sized organization. It also applies to large organization. And then ultimately, I will wrap up with just some conversation on building regional shared cyber resilience. So I have a very short agenda here today that I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about what does it mean to have cybersecurity growth and trust. So cybersecurity is a pillar of growth and digital trust by strengthening cyber resilience within small and medium-sized companies. It can not only safeguard operations, but protect customer confidence and unlock new opportunities for regional and competitive economic growth. I have a personal saying that I normally provide for my constituents as well as my customer in previous role. And I like to talk about cybersecurity from the perspective of managing cyber risk. Normally, when we think about cybersecurity, we think about it from the perspective of technology and digital advancement. But today, I want to shift your focus on cybersecurity from a place of managing cyber risk. And by extension, I want you to think about it managing that cyber risk as managing business and then further into that people risk. Within the Caribbean, specifically the English speaking Caribbean, 70 to 80% of all businesses are small and medium sized. And so we rely heavily as a part of our economic survival on making sure that these businesses are productive, they're safe, and they are effective within the role. However, many MSMEs remain highly vulnerable to cyber threats due to limited resources, technical capacity issues. And when we talk about technical capacity, as we're also talking about limited talent pool in order for us to thrive. And then, of course, access to secure digital infrastructure. It is then vital that for our own sustainability, that we look at protecting small and medium-sized organizations as a way to improve national and even regional productivity. And of course, regional competitiveness. So what is managing cyber risk at its core? I think we went into this a little bit, but I'll just read this definition from CISA. It is the process of identifying and analyzing, assessing and communicating risk, and accepting, avoiding, transferring, and controlling it to an acceptable level. And when I was preparing this, I'll stop there for a minute. I thought, surely this content, this information that I'm going to share, is something that everyone knows. And I wanted to make sure that I provided information that will give you some content that you've seen before and that you're familiar with, but make sure it leave you with tidbits that's important for you to progress, especially as a small organization. And how do we work together to protect those small and medium-sized organizations? So let's talk about cybersecurity and cyber risk as a business problem. If you look at the slide here, I include all types of risk. And I mentioned earlier that cyber attacks can have serious business and financial risks to organizations of all size. A single attack, as you well know, can cripple a small business. So think about the first type of company that comes to mind is like those micro companies. So your beauty supply company, or maybe someone who's offering services like your lash tech, your nail tech, your makeup artist. Those very small organizations that's depending on a digital presence for their appointment booking or for payment services. And yet, like any other major organization, they're susceptible to cyber threats. So when you think about cybersecurity, while there are technical risks, I think it's important for us to consider what are the legal risks, the cybersecurity risks, the people risks, the strategic risks, the reputational risks, digital risk, and then how does a small mom and pop store or your nail tech or your beauty professional withstand and manage all these types of risks? And so here's something that I like to leave with these types of organization. One, it's not personal to you, the organization. So it doesn't matter what size your organization is, whether you have a complement of 10 employees or you have a complement of 100 employees. If you have an IP address somewhere out there, you're not only vulnerable, but just susceptible to cybersecurity impact. So there's some strategic importance here in safeguarding small to medium-sized organizations. One, like I mentioned, they play a vital role in regional economic growth. I got some information from the POJ website, and they said that 40% of the Jamaican GDP comes from small to medium-sized organization, which employs 34%, includes 34% of employment. And that's very much like the Bahamas, where many of the businesses that sustain economic prosperity are small companies. The second one is increasing adoption to digital technology. In this age of AI, where we are using AI for many, many, many things, including editing, graphics, design, communication, security, what we're finding is with the digital expansion of digital technology, it certainly creates a wider attack surface. And that does not exclude small to medium companies. We've also seen an alarming rise in malware. A lot of that is further fueled by the advancement in technologies like AI. And then what we see is for small to medium companies, there's a misconception of what risk exposure is. So what I hear where I sit and when I engage with small to medium sized organization is that I'm too small. No one cares about me and my little company. No one cares about the information that I have. Or a better one would be, where will I find the money to implement cybersecurity controls to protect my data? Or another good example is, I don't have any data. What data do I have that requires protection? And if so, how do I go about this? And moving back to my point on putting together information that will suit small to medium-sized companies and understanding our strategic roles within the government, through private and public partnership, how do we make sure that we provide space, we provide information, and we provide support for small to medium-sized organizations? And finally, the last point is the significant impact of cybersecurity attack on small to medium-sized companies. So for a larger company that may be able to withstand a cybersecurity attack, this is not always true for a small to medium-sized company, because as mentioned before, they have limited resources, and that mainly is financial resources, to withstand major cybersecurity attacks. I mentioned just briefly some of the threat landscape. One is the increase in sophistication of our threat actors, diversity in our threat actors. So a lot of times when we talk to small to medium-sized organizations, there's this conception that the threat actors somewhere far away, and we don't think about the inherent risks of our human beings, the people that work for us. So we don't think about insider threat, or we don't think about negligence or lack of information. And then certainly when we look again at emerging technology and how that impacts how our employees within a small organization will share information, for example, on social media, how they will collect information from their customers, that certainly broadens the threat landscape. So some of the landscape that we see, cybersecurity landscape that we see, and I mentioned already, is very targeted approach to small and medium-sized organization. So it's increasingly attacking them by criminals who view them as easy target. And why are they easy? They're easy because, like I mentioned before, without the capacity, without the limited resources, we're seeing that they have limited defense, and that carries over to limited education. So it's important that organizations like CIRT and CIRT-BS be very intentional and very strategic in how we provide a unique set of support for small to medium-sized organizations. Then there's outdated vulnerable systems. And this happens because of limited resources again. So I don't have the money and I am a small organization, then it's unlikely that I will be upgrading my technology within the prescribed amount of time. What that does then, it creates greater vulnerability, not only for my internal systems, but across people, process, and technology. Because what we see in these small organizations is that when something goes wrong, it isn't an immediate fix. We then do a workaround, and so that changes the process. And then we move from that workaround, and then some employees are now printing information, some taking them home, and it also impacts growth and the way employees will identify risk within an organization. This is a big one, and I want to talk about this. I'll stay here for a minute. Lack of cybersecurity awareness. I mentioned earlier that I applaud JA CIRT for an amazing lineup of cybersecurity awareness activities for the month of October. But I want to drill this down to smaller organizations and how we should approach cybersecurity awareness. By show of hands, how many of you have been impacted in some way over the last 10 years by a cybersecurity event? So you can give me a thumbs up. Okay. So what that means is that we are all aware that there is a risk associated with cybersecurity, much like physical security. So what I'm seeing and what my advice is, when we are starting these small organizations or small companies, we generally think about if it's brick and mortar, we got to make sure that we have physical security in place. We will not start or open our establishment without having an alarm system, a monitoring system, maybe some cameras. Maybe we'll have bars around our house or around the establishment. Sorry. We won't do that simply because we have an appreciation for the type of physical security risk. Similarly, I do not see that same comprehension or appreciation carrying over to cybersecurity and digital threats. So somehow there is just this misconception on what is real versus what is perceived to be happening. And that gap is something that we need to change simply because we're finding that many small to medium-sized organizations are experiencing tons of social engineering attacks and ransomware because there's lack of cybersecurity awareness and knowledge there. And then lastly is insufficient technology related to backup and recovery. And so we don't have redundancies built in. And partly it's because, again, small to medium-sized organization, they're not building cybersecurity by design. So as we talked about earlier, including physical security by design, day one, cybersecurity isn't a part of the day one conversation. And what I would like to see shift is that cybersecurity then becomes a part of the day one conversation. Let's dive into this perception versus reality. I mentioned that the small to medium-sized company will say, I'm too small to be a target. And I've already said that no one is too small to be a target. No one is exempt or removed from being a target to a cyber attack. The reality is cyber criminals often exploit smaller businesses because, like I mentioned before, they're easy to target. And the accumulation, so if you attack one major organization, you may be able to gain, say, $100,000 as an example. But if you attack 10, and you gain 10,000 from each, you see those numbers start to add up. And a lot of the objective for cyber criminals is centered around finances. It's centered around money. And so it doesn't make a difference if you're a small company or not. If you have assets that's valuable, then you're vulnerable or susceptible. A second myth that I brought up here is the expense associated for small businesses. And this is true. This isn't just a myth. It is expensive. Cybersecurity, the way we normally approach cybersecurity as an industry, sometimes can be expensive, especially for micro organizations. Think again, your nail tech. Think again, your hair braider, or maybe you're someone who works in the tourism industry who might be a hair braider or someone who sells souvenir shop. Like, think about those people and how they having a presence and a digital presence, and then having to figure out what should I do in order to protect my data? What do I do to protect the data of my customers? And then ultimately determining the level of investment needed for their digital presence. So what are some of the key benefits here, strategic benefits for integrating cybersecurity as a part of small to medium-sized enterprise operations? So the first one is you want to be able to enhance customer trust. Because most of us have experienced a cybersecurity event, we are aware that this risk exists. And a really good add-on or a marketing tip, for lack of a better word, would be I am a secure organization and communicate how I will handle your information. So that means secure transaction, considering data protection at the start, build credibility with your customers as a small to medium sized organization. And this will build confidence within your product. The other is regulatory compliance. And you normally see this with mid-sized organizations. There are compliance needs for many of these organizations, both local and global, and that you need to comply with in order to be cybersecurity effective. The third is business continuity, making sure that you can withstand a major cybersecurity event. So proactive cybersecurity measures to help prevent operational disruption from a cybersecurity attack. And then finally, marketing competitiveness, demonstrating cybersecurity resilience can attack both your partners and investors. And you want to be sure that you are saying, I've done my best in order to protect my customers' data, to protect my data. So why should we assess? I mentioned assessing, considering cybersecurity at the start. The first is being able to make informed decisions as a small organization, as a small company or medium-sized company. Risk is, you're always impacted by risk. And risk assessment provides critical insights to make well-informed decisions and allows you to decide where you're going to assign your resources. And this takes us to the second point, effective resource allocation. By identifying and prioritizing your risk as an organization, you can allocate resources more appropriately and more effectively because we have an infinite amount of resources, and that's across people, process, and technology. And you have to be able to consider that while cybersecurity is a major enterprise risk and should be considered as such, the organization has other types of risk that I would have mentioned earlier. And then finally, mitigating negative consequences. Risk assessments help organizations to develop proactive strategies to minimize the impact of potential risks and manage adverse outcomes. Here are some steps to assessing your risk, more importantly, your cyber risk. First, you want to identify and prioritize critical assets. You cannot protect what you don't know. And when I talk about your critical assets, I'm also talking about your data assets, understanding your customers, your third-party access, your list of data and physical assets, your presence on social media, your servers, your customer data, your intellectual property, and then assessing its value and determining where it sits on your list of what is crown jewels versus minimal risk to you as an organization. And then secondly, understand the vulnerabilities that will impact you and the likely attack vector. So we are aware that if you're using older systems, simply because you don't have the capacity to upgrade or switch out those systems, then you need to understand how asset may be threatened, the weaknesses that exist, and then be able to put compensating controls in place that will lessen the impact. Thirdly, implement effective mitigation strategy. Applying appropriate cybersecurity controls and mitigation measures, applying appropriate cybersecurity controls and mitigation measures Regularly review risk profiles and adjust security strategies based on evolving threats. And then fourth, allocate resources effectively towards highest risk. And this is establish appropriate strategies to address identified risks. So one is identifying your risk, identifying your asset, understanding your vulnerabilities, and then applying a strategy that will allow you to mitigate those risks. So here are some key controls that you need to consider as a small to medium-sized company. Define cybersecurity policy objective. Understanding the roles and responsibility of those within your organization. It's important to note that cybersecurity is a whole of business and whole of society issue, meaning that we cannot do this alone. So this is not the responsibility of the IT department within a small organization. It's certainly the responsibility of everyone. So cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. And if you broaden the lens, it is not the responsibility of JA CIRT cybersecurity. It is everyone's collective responsibility to supporting our regional, local, and then individual organizational resilience, cyber resilience. The other is establishing access control. We find that in many cases, the precursor to many of the incidents that we see is flawed access controls, and this specifically to third-party access and or creeping access from someone who's maybe lower in the organization having elevated access because there's no review. So outline procedures for granting and monitoring and revoking access to systems, especially when you have a member of your employment leave an organization. You want to make sure that you know what's on your network and you're managing the access on the network, as well as you understand data and how that access is being given, and you're following principle of least privilege. Implementing data protection measures. So specifically the requirement for data backup that I mentioned, encryption, securely storing your information to support confidentiality, integrity, and availability of sensitive information. Having an incident response plan. I can't tell you how important this is. And I know the question may be coming up, Sumitra, if I'm a really small organization, then how do I have an incident response plan? Well, for micro organizations where there's one person employed, like the example I gave about your nail tech, there's not an immediate expectation that you have a written incident response plan. But I want you to think about what happens or what should you do should an incident occur. And that information is essentially what you need to know. You need to know who you should call. So if there's a financial fraud associated with cybersecurity, you know how to call your bank. You should have your information backed up in cloud, and all of these are available to individuals. You want to be able to update your systems regularly. So all of that is a preparing measure. And for those who are just, again, individual entities like micro companies, you want to have relationships or understand making sure you can call the CIRT or you can call the police and when to do so. So those are some key things to consider. The other is enforce compliance and monitoring. And you see this more with mid-sized companies, establishing mechanisms to monitor compliance, as well as cybersecurity policies and tracking those compliance. We've talked a little bit about this already, and I told you that this is one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of where I sit. The limited use or of strong access control. So limit access control to only authorized users, making sure that you have principle of least privilege, regular review of this access control, log and monitoring, and then definitely secure remote access. I think I talked a lot about some of the key things small to medium-sized companies should be doing. But I want to touch on how do you build trust and growth and why this is important. And this has to be strategic. So cybersecurity strategy, or cyber risk strategy rather, is not just about protection, it's about resilience. It's making sure that you can anticipate threat and respond effectively. And the word that comes to mind is withstand, because we will all have a cybersecurity event. We will have multiple cybersecurity events within our lifetime, within our companies, within our organization. Like I mentioned, no one is immune or exempt from having an impactful cybersecurity event. However, the goal here is that as organization, as nations, that we have the capacity to withstand such. And that brings up the conversation of trust. How do we build trust so that we have security and cybersecurity resilience that would allow us to withstand? Because as you can appreciate, this work cannot be done alone. So the first is competency, making sure that we have the necessary skills and expertise. And this is more at a national and regional level. When we say we CIRT-BS or JA CERT, say that we are here to support you to respond to cyber incidents and to coordinate cyber incident, there's an expectation that we are competent enough to be able to do the work that we say we can do. The other is communication. We truly hear and understand the needs of the people we serve. And this can also be true at the organizational level, that you understand your risk and you understand the needs of the business, and their cybersecurity becomes an enabler for not only trust, but also growth. Third, you are committed to this work, because cybersecurity, it's the joy that keeps on giving. It's the joy, it really is the joy that keeps on giving. So it requires a level of commitment to making sure that cybersecurity controls are in place and tested, and that we are continuously improving and being more effective when it comes to providing services to those we serve. And then caring about the interests. And then lastly, being honest, ethical, and having integrity. And how do you see this? You see this at the organizational level, where an organization may have an incident and they may hide the incident, or they are not forthcoming enough to share with their constituents or their stakeholders that we would have experienced this incident and your data may have been impacted. Or you may see it at higher levels within the government, where they're not being honest about what's happening. What I'm saying here today, it's important in order to build trust that we be honest, ethical, and we have integrity with those who we serve. And this ties right into the assessing cyber risk maturity. Context and strategic direction that I mentioned earlier. Understanding the organization main objectives, how risk can be an enabler and enhance those objectives. And then understanding your culture and authority. This again speaks to building trust with those we serve. And this again, for small organization, you might think, how does this apply? But making sure that you're communicating and you identify yourself as one where cybersecurity and cybersecurity risk management is important to you as an organization. So examine risk-based decisions are being made by those with the right level of authority. That's really what it is. There's the tone at the top. We care about it. Being here today, being a part of this webinar, being a part of the Awareness Month series. This is an intentional approach to provide education and awareness for the constituents of Jamaica. And so this is one way where risk culture and cybersecurity culture is important. Then risk management process. Determine if the current process to identify, assess, respond, monitor, and report on risk is benefiting the organization. And then finally, consider opportunities, where risk-related data is being gathered, reported, and used to make informed decisions across the enterprise. This is no different than whether or not you're a small company or you're an island state. The same things apply. I'm going to pause here for a second because I mentioned culture already, but I want to highlight one major component of this slide. I usually say that culture would eat strategy for breakfast. And this is important to note because you could have the best intention, the best strategy, very documented. But if cybersecurity isn't a part of the overall organizational culture, if we're not building cybersecurity as a part of the overall national culture, if we're not building cybersecurity as a part of the overall regional culture, then what we will find is that we will constantly be fighting against the grain. So events such as these, where we're intentional about integrating cybersecurity awareness education and showing the priority of cybersecurity to the people we serve is important. And one element of that is leadership commitment. It's important to the government of Jamaica to make sure that its citizens are secure. And by extension, that small to medium-sized organization understand the appropriate response to cyber risk and also understand how important it is to have that education. So leaders must first prioritize cybersecurity and model good practices. And this is within at all levels. Then communication, education, and awareness. I just mentioned that. And then integrating cybersecurity into all processes and policies. This is also done through the visibility of communication. So it's good for us to make sure that we have tune at the top, leadership commitment. It's also good to make sure that it's embedded in core processes. But there's a level of public awareness and communication that has to happen for people to understand. So it's not a one and done thing. So reporting happens at all levels. If you're noticing up, down, and across. Cybersecurity, because it's everyone's business, that it should be communicated throughout the business as a part of the core components of business processes. And I know when we think about it, we generally think of cybersecurity as IT's business, or maybe you see it as CIRT's business. But what I'm driving home here is that collectively, we have to make efforts if we want to be effective. So finally, my final topic area is to talk about building shared cyber resilience. And this ties in all of the other components of the things that I've spoken about so far, about culture, what small to medium-sized business need to do, some of the responsibilities of the government, and then, of course, what our regional perspective look like. Building shared resilience is about fostering collaboration, empowering communities, and recognizing that a connected world, our strength lies in unity against evolving threats. Fostering collaboration requires us to do just that. It requires us to engage one another in order to withstand any disruption or threats that may be impacting us. What does that shared resilience look like? It's building a shared knowledge base. It's engaging in joint and shared training and exercise. And this happens at every level. So this is at the organizational level, the policy and decision-making level, as well as the strategic level. Investing in research and development, and that can be done jointly. Trust building and culture building specific to cybersecurity, making sure that culture and awareness is a part of our shared resilience. Enhancing communication channels, I mentioned before. If I don't know what's going on, it doesn't impact me at all. Supporting development of national cybersecurity program. In that, this is our collective responsibility to be effective, to be secure, to build this resilience, then everyone has a part to play in this work. Collaborative framework, meaning engaging. Part of the reason I'm here participating and speaking with all of you is because it's a personal commitment for both myself and Director Sterling to work together in order to build regional resilience within the English-speaking Caribbean. And so that also looks at sharing information and not being afraid to engage when it's tricky, when it looks tricky, when we are attacked or asking for help or offering assistance when needed. Fostering policy development, incident response collaboration. That's one of the things that we're committed to doing in an effort to building shared national resilience and regional resilience. It takes me to how then do we share information? Why is it so important to share information? I'm going to talk about this from two perspectives. I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of the organizational level, but I'm also going to talk about it from the perspective of the national level or regional level. It's important that we establish trust-based sharing of information. One, what I'm finding, especially in cases when we have incidents or when we are experiencing incident and when they are very known or public, there is a victim blaming. And so that's one reason that I've seen that organizations, as well as nations, or anyone impacted by an incident may not share information. There's also a level of mistrust. So we are afraid to lose competitiveness. We are afraid to share information with an entity because we're like, I'm not sure how that information is going to be handled. But one thing that's important to know when you're trying to build cyber resilience, shared cyber resilience, is that we have to form a trusted community. And we have to agree that within this trusted community, these are the components on which we can share information. Then there's also fair or inaction. So when there's an incident, we don't share anything. We either don't do anything or we're afraid to do anything. So we doubt whether sharing information will make a difference. So then we don't share the information. And this is also true for victims. So victims of cyber attack, we will find that victims may not share, may not report, simply because it's like, oh, there's nothing that can be done. I want to change that myth, that narrative that sharing not only helps you, but also helps us as the national CIRT, and it also helps the potential next victim in that it allows us to potentially mitigate that threat. And then finally, the competitive advantage of why people aren't sharing information. Just understanding that they don't want to be exposed in that way. They don't want, I'm said company, and I don't want the country or the world to know that I had a cybersecurity incident, because certainly that would look bad, that would impact my reputation. And that may have some impact on your reputation. This is true. But one of the things that's shifting is that, as I mentioned before, no one is immune or exempt from having a major cyber incident. I think I said this earlier, I may have said this earlier. We find that major companies with not unlimited resources, but near unlimited resources are having major cyber incidents and having to disclose that. So consider yourself very much a part of the community if you're experiencing an incident and having to report it, simply because it improves the way we are able to respond further. So when building cyber resilience at a national level, as well as at a strategic level, it's important to consider these four things. And this is essentially my final slide. It's anticipate understanding that you will have a major cyber event. And so there needs to be a level of preparedness for this adversity. Understand how you will withstand this as a small to medium-sized organization. And this is implementing those controls. This is assessing your organization, understanding how you will assign your resources. How do you make risk-based decisions in order for you to be effective? And then recovery. So you have to prepare. Recovery requires preparedness. I've said this before, there's hardly any recovery without preparedness. So restore mission critical or business critical function. And the way you know this is by identifying and protecting those mission critical functions within your organizations, as well as, if we're thinking about this at a national level within the country, so what are your critical information infrastructure agencies, and how do we make sure that we can protect them? And then finally, adapting, modifying your mission, making sure that you're considering key business function that you're considering business continuity as a part of your overall practice, so then you're prepared to withstand what will inevitably be a cybersecurity event that you will have to deal with in the future. Before I wrap up, I want to say thank you very much for listening to me. You've been an amazing audience so far. I didn't have much engagement so far. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have related to how do we build trust as well as building cyber resilience. Thank you all for listening.
You've done more than just endure a good audience. I believe you've brought to the table the sort of insight that only a woman's intuition could bring. And I want to really thank you for taking the time out to sort of drive home some of the points about the role of MSMEs in small economies, particularly their contributions to the gross domestic product of those countries in terms of the ability for persons to respond, to appreciate, and to not see being a victim of a cybercrime as being a debilitating impact, but having the catalyst to drive change. You also spoke about the importance of risk assessment, understanding those challenges that are there so you can put the necessary control measures in place so that access is based on least privilege. People just really need the access to do what they need to do to get the job done. I like your 5 Cs, and I'll probably steal it as I go forward in the month. But the thing that really probably got me chuckling was the fact that culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And I really appreciate what that brought to the discussion. The need for shared resilience, and especially in small economies, the need to have information shared. The threat actors do it, and they do it quite effectively. And if us as the practitioners don't, we have a significant challenge. Samitra, your talk this morning has been quite enlightening and heartwarming. And I will field the questions to you if they're in the chat. If not, we will ask persons to just raise their hands. We will unmute you and you can ask the questions. So while we wait on people to build their courage, okay, we have one.
I like it when there's no questions. I mean, I did a good job. I like to think so.
Okay, Dean, you can unmute and go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate your talk and resonating with Lieutenant Colonel. We like your 5 Cs. And what also resonates with me is the people, process, and technology. That's something that I preach almost daily when it comes to cybersecurity. So as a practitioner, I know that the SMEs, they have, some of them have big businesses, but small enterprises, and they really don't find cybersecurity as something important for their daily runnings and functions. How do we encourage places like for me, pet peeves are like doctors' offices that collects everything about you, PII, PHI, PFI, and other small organizations that do a lot of critical stuff to what is the best approach for them to move in and add in cybersecurity to their daily operations without fear and within price mark that is palatable to them? How do you think how can we encourage them to do that?
Thank you for that question. So I'm going to give you this from the Bible of Symmetria. This is my personal advice. As an industry, we rely a lot on presenting all of as kind of a fear mongering industry. We will say, look at all the things that can happen to you. And so that hasn't been effective for us as an industry, simply because what it does, I believe, is kind of create this fear of, well, if all this can happen to me, there's so little I can do, and so therefore I won't do anything. I think what is more effective, in my opinion, is to remove the idea of cybersecurity as a technical risk, and really look at it as a business risk, and talk to them specifically from the business perspective of, look at how your business will be disrupted as a result of this risk, not about where all of the technical components, because we love technology. We are technicians, and that's our realm. A doctor really doesn't care, to use your example, too much. And I don't want to say they don't care, but it's lower on their list of things they care about than the actual technology that will be used or the technology that needs to be implemented. So the first thing is we need to change the language, reframe the language that we're using for small to medium-sized companies that's more adaptive to their experience and their frame of reference, that it's a business risk. And similar to physical security and any type of financial risk and legal risk, this risk could have major disruption to your operation or potentially financial disruption to you as an organization. So that's one way. The other is, as an industry, we like to present problems first. I think, again, we need to shift that to, what are the solutions that I can offer a small to medium-sized company like yourself that you can implement day one? NIST has a small to medium-sized framework that they've adapted for small to medium-sized organizations. That's a good one that I kind of carry around with me. And I say, here is a framework that you can implement. And even that is heavy. We want to scale down our ask of small to medium-sized organization when they are not technology organizations. And then finally, my third point is education and awareness. How do we go about educating our constituents and our stakeholders beyond have a strong password? And I think what we do there, and I'm not suggesting that not having a strong password or saying having a strong password shouldn't be a part of the cyber hygiene. I think what happens is when we start off with our awareness, we have these few items that we start off, and mainly they are cyber hygiene based. When I'm speaking to someone who's in a small to medium-sized company, they're saying, oh, well, I have a strong password, so that means I'm fine. Because if that's all you're going to tell me, I have strong password, I update my phone, and that's where I have my information. But if I talk to them about what information do you have? How can that information be impacted? And then by extension, how can that information be adversely used to disrupt your organization? I do find that my approach is a little bit more digestible. I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate your perspective. I'll add it to all the different conversations I have had and will be having in the future, which I've been trying to incorporate, but I appreciate your take on it as well.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Dean. Thank you, Sumitra. Do we have any other takers? So, Sumitra, I have one for you.
Please.
The question in the chat is, what are some of the most common attack vectors targeting MSMEs today, and how do they differ from those used against large institutions and businesses?
So I don't believe that I am seeing a vast difference between the type of threats that's impacting small to medium-sized companies versus those that are impacting large organizations. I am seeing quite across the board similar ones. So what we're seeing a lot of is your ransomware, and that may have been brought on by social engineering and any type of social engineering that your phishing, your smishing, your mishing, and all of those others. We're seeing that seems to be kind of in my industry or in the Bahamas specifically. That's what I'm seeing. I see a lot of ransomware that's being produced in that way. The other that I'm seeing a lot of, more specifically, is denial of service attacks, specifically for small organizations where their presence may only be a website. I'm seeing some denial of service attack. And then I'm seeing fraud as a result of ransomware or phishing that may have come about through someone clicking on a link and being impacted in that way. One other key one that I like to mention, specifically to small to medium-sized business that we don't talk enough about, and I'm seeing it more, is what I like to call and what everyone calls insider threat. So we see this more so with small to medium-sized organizations simply because there's negligence or lack of education in that space. So we see more small to medium-sized organizations clicking on those links, being susceptible to ransomware because they don't have redundancies built in like backup. So when we were engaging with them, what I'm seeing is they're starting from scratch, I suppose, when we look at controls that they have implemented. You're muted still.
Awesome. It's that time of day. Nordia, you can unmute and go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sitting here listening, and it's very insightful, very insightful. But my question, it basically ties into what the person asked earlier. So basically, with AI-related threats now increasing across the region and even globally, how can small, medium enterprises stay connected through even the Jamaica CIRT or any community networks to share information? And are there like any workshops or initiatives that help build cyber resilience or the capacity now?
I think there's like several questions in there, so let me attempt to answer all. So the first question is, with the sophistication in technologies like AI, what can we do? Like, how do we recognize? And you're right. What we are seeing is because of AI. Before, I'll talk about before AI was prevalent, we would see. There's a joke. I'll put a joke in there. When we would get those letters saying that our prince is coming for us, waiting with $1 million, and all you would have to call your prince and you can marry your prince and you would get your $1 million. The way you would be able to identify that that wasn't said prince is because you would see a lot of grammar, misspelled words, and that's how you would know, okay, well, this can't be my prince, because certainly my prince would know how to proofread this email. Now what you're finding is with AI, you don't see that. It's very difficult to identify phishing attempts through AI. I'm using that as an example. However, the key thing is still awareness. So, and the awareness and hygiene doesn't necessarily change overly. You still have to be very conscious of who's writing you and whether or not you're expecting this email. You want to be cautious about clicking on links. You want to be cautious about downloading. You want to still have, and even more so, what I like to call a working active paranoia when it comes to, you want to be sure you're not downloading things from your browser. Some of those same basic hygiene hasn't changed overly as a result of AI. What they have done is there is an increased need to pay attention to those cyber hygiene rules that we are aware of and that's been taught to us from before. Then you mentioned, I think you asked, are there any initiatives or any type of awareness training that one can take to be more aware, to appropriately know how to respond to phishing? I think that was the second part of the question. Yes, training like this, training offered through your CIRT organization. I certainly, this month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, CIRT-BS, we are offering a series of cybersecurity awareness training as well. AI organizations, SANS organization, awareness, other CIRTs around the world are offering online tools. There's tons of cyber hygiene awareness information that's available for the general public should they be interested. But as a point to start, I will start with your local JA CIRT. And did I miss a part of the question? Because I think I had 3 sections, but now I think I've forgotten one part of the question. Nadia, if you could help me if I didn't answer everything.
She has written in the chat, no, you did well. You did answer all. So we will take that. We have 2 questions in the chat, and because we had only asked Sumitra for an hour of her time, we're going to take those 2, and we'll probably call stumps at that point. The first is from Rihanna Ajigal, which asks, what best practices do you recommend to encourage reporting, particularly in cases where these small businesses may fear reputational damage, financial loss, or regulatory consequences?
Okay. That's a really good question because I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of fear around reporting. So I think the first thing that we need to talk about is reporting to whom. And I have 2 suggestions there. Your JA CERT director, Sterling, will tell you that they follow TLP protocol. And so it's a traffic light protocol, so red being most restricted and clear being it's free for all. When you share information with your local CERT, it will be treated in that manner. More time than not, it will be TLP red. And this is what we follow as members of FIRST, similarly at CIRT-BS. And we advise you that when you report your incident to us, it will be treated with the highest level of confidentiality within the CERT. So for that, I will always recommend that you report to your local CERT division. The other is reporting to the police. Specifically, if it's associated, we've identified that it's a cybercrime, then it's important that you make that report to the police. And again, that information should be treated with the same level of confidentiality, as I mentioned, with your local CERT. I do want to add one final thing to that, though. While we are very concerned as a small to medium-sized organization about reputational differences, I think the idea behind organizations having a cyber incident and the way how we see that, I think culturally, as an industry, that's shifting. Because with the sophistication of technology like AI, we're seeing an uptick in incidents. We are aware that we're behind. Having an incident does not mean that you haven't done best effort as an organization in order to secure your environment. And while for some, the narrative may showcase in that way, that is certainly not the truth for most organizations who's trying to implement cybersecurity controls with the limited resources that they have. Reporting is not just about advising your collective stakeholders. It helps you as the organization, but it helps your local CERT to be able to, one, address the incident, work the incident, report it to other regional CERTs, get support on the incident in order to support everyone involved. So my request to you, or request to any small to medium-sized organization who still has a lot of fear surrounding mistrust of how information will be handled or the reputational damage being impacted, is report, but certainly make sure that you have a communication strategy so that you can lead and shape the narrative of an incident should it occur. Again, you're muted, Director.
And the final question that we will take from Kennard Goldson. Considering that human ineptitude remains a major weakness in cybersecurity, what strategies can MSMEs adopt to upskill employees and attract top cybersecurity talent?
That's a really good question. I mean, that's top tier, honestly. So I'll tell you about what I am doing to, one, attract cybersecurity talent in an environment where the talent pool is small. We have to be comfortable with hiring out of college. We have to be comfortable with educating and upskilling the future, getting people in the pipeline, attracting people to this industry. This is the only way we'll be sustainable. Um, it's unfortunate that there aren't as many cybersecurity professionals. For all of us to have top tier cybersecurity professionals in our organizations, that's just not what the state is. So we have to get comfortable with the idea that we're going to have to find someone who probably doesn't yet have the skill, upskill them, be very intentional about that as a part of your business strategy, and then be prepared to do it in 3 years because somebody else is going to hire them. And that's okay. And be okay with contributing to the talent pool to develop cybersecurity professionals. And this is a regional issue that we have. Like, not even regional, it's global. We're all suffering in that there's not enough capacity to serve us in the way that we need. And so I am being very intentional as a hiring manager that I need to find some college students, I need to find some junior analysts, and I need to be very, again, intentional about how I educate them and be okay with losing them to the market and then bringing in some more, an open door, revolving door, with clear intentions of how we're going to upskill these people to support us.
Right. So I don't think I could have said it better. And it's a similar paradigm here where the top cybersecurity skill sets attract the top paychecks. And when you work in government that has to watch every penny that gets spent, or you are in a small to medium-sized business where you can't compete with the big corporations. You have to try to get the best out of the talent pool you have access to, but be intentional in how you create the specific skill set to your business with the understanding that in a period of time, short though it may seem, you're going to have to replace that person. The idea here is to lengthen that dwell time from about 6 months to about 3 years, like you said. So, at least you're not just constantly going to market. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been very good to have Sumitra here with us today. And certainly the points you've touched, I believe, are main pain points for us in the English-speaking Caribbean and the region writ large. However, I believe some of the solutions you've given are solutions that are sustainable if applied and if followed through. What we want to encourage for both the team at CIRT-BS and the team here at JCERT is the continued belief that we must do this in service to our nation. And for those of us who decide to stay, that we do the service in such a way that the 5 C's come back to us in everything we do. And so while we may think about, the first 3, competence, etc., caring and character really sometimes is what is needed, because that person suffering sometimes what is very traumatic to them in terms of that event really needs somebody who will listen with empathy and be able to guide them appropriately. Sumitra, the CERT division is grateful. Jamaica is grateful that you could grace us with your presence today. And I want to, on behalf of the CERT here in Jamaica and the grateful people of this country, thank you. I believe the only female director of a CERT within the region, for taking the time and sharing with us. And we look forward to strengthening the partnerships and building a shared cyber resilience across the English-speaking Caribbean. Thank you very much, milady.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of myself and my entire team who's also online. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you. I appreciate the collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to seeing all of you, plus your friends, on Thursday as we continue this series of events. Goodbye and good luck.